Howdy folks, it's Robey here with The Manufactured Mind, coming at you today with an episode on extreme fatigue during methadone taper, a convergence of pharmacology, endocrinology, and neurological recovery. So without further ado, let's get right in. The fatigue experienced at 36 milligrams of methadone, which I'm at, down from 150 milligrams as of a year and a half ago, is what I was at then. This fatigue is not just expected, it's pharmacologically inevitable. Multiple overlapping mechanisms are converging. Adenylyl cyclase superactivation creates withdrawal symptoms even while still on medication. Opioid-induced endocrine disruption affects 63% of chronic users, with fatigue causing hormone suppression, and in my case, 8 years of polysubstanse use, which means that's 8 years of multiple substances. Combining multiple substances. There was 1 year where I was literally doing meth, coke, ecstasy, pills, any pills I could get my hands on, dope, which is heroin, fentanyl, all of that shit combined on a daily basis. And the last year of my addiction, I was using fentanyl with meth combined. Straight speedballing. That was my thing, speedballing. And now I am regretting it more than ever because, and I know that me being on the methadone has a part to play in this, but the fatigueness that I am experiencing, folks, on a daily basis is unprecedented. It is insane. Today, my day did not start until 12 p.m. I got up at 4 a.m. like I always do, but I could not keep my eyes open from 4 a.m. to 12 p.m., even though that I slept all night. So the struggle is real, really real. And this is something that I am so frustrated with. And I just wanted to stop. I mean, I'm 2.5 years into recovery with the medication-assisted treatment, with the methadone, which I'm tapering off of actively, and I'm down to 36 milligrams. I'm almost there. But the fatigueness is like making me just want to just not be on this stuff anymore, like right now. But I can't do that because it's not safe, for one, and two, every other time I've tried, or made an attempt, rather, to quit something cold turkey, it has led me straight to relapse. And I refuse to be the definition of insane, which is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. So instead of going cold turkey this time, I've decided to use the medication-assisted treatment. And it's worked in regards to me not consuming any illicit substances, but this fatigueness that stems from the 8 years of active addiction plus the medication-assisted treatment is so frustrating. I can't put it in any other way. It's just extremely, extremely frustrating, folks. So I put together a little profile report on myself here. So the patient's profile patient being me. Prolonged polysubstance history with stimulant-induced sleep deprivation, extended opioid exposure, and ongoing taper represents a convergence of fatigue-producing mechanisms that addiction medicine literature consistently identifies as producing the most protracted recovery courses. Understanding each mechanism is essential for both realistic expectations and targeted intervention. Again, folks, as normal, if you hear me any long pauses between me saying something, it's simply because I'm stimming. I do this thing with my fingers and my mouth. It has to feel right in order for me to stop. And it's due to my neurodivergence, my autism, ADHD. So just bear with me, please. So, why tapering creates fatigue despite still being on methadone? Fatigue during methadone dose reduction is well documented in clinical literature. And by the way, as usual, I'm not a doctor, therapist, or counselor, or professional of any kind. I am an expert of myself and myself alone, so I'm not giving advice. I am simply explaining what is going on with me based off of the research I've done. So, the fatigue during methadone dose reduction is well documented in clinical literature, driven by a phenomenon called adenylyl cyclase superactivation. During chronic opioid exposure, the brain compensates for mu-opioid receptor stimulation by upregulating intracellular CAMP signaling pathways. When doses decrease, even gradually, this compensatory overdrive produces a state of neuronal hyperexcitability that paradoxically manifests as exhaustion. So each 1 milligram reduction creates a quote-unquote mini withdrawal where receptor occupancy drops before neuroadaptations catch up. At 36 milligrams, which 76% reduction from the starting dose, which was 150 milligrams, the starting dose that I started to decrease from. The patient is approaching the threshold below which symptoms typically intensify. Most clinicians report symptom escalation below 40 milligrams. The conservative taper rate of 1 milligram every 2 weeks, while slower than most guidelines recommend, cannot entirely prevent this neuroadaptive lag. So, I guess I should tap into why I'm only doing 1 milligram at a time. And I touched on this in a couple episodes before. Prior to 36 milligrams, I tapered at 4 milligrams every 2 weeks until the last taper of 4 milligram decrease was down to 37. And I had forgot to take my dose one day, in the morning, early morning, as I usually do. And so by later in the day, I still hadn't realized that I had forgotten to take it. And I was feeling very off, very strange. I ended up having a panic attack. It was really bad. I thought I was going to end up having to go to the hospital, but then I realized that I didn't take my dose. I took my dose and I was fine. But that scared me. It scared the hell out of me. Because I've been in psychosis before, and that was like the first thing that came to my mind was like, oh man, what if that happens again? Mind you, when I went into psychosis, I was on a whole plethora of substances, and it started out by me in bed and waking up, sleepwalking, and I endured 5 days that I don't remember of my life in a psych ward because of the psychosis. But that's a story for another day. That was probably one of the scariest things that I've ever endured in my life. I thought people were dead that weren't dead, like my family. It was scary. Like, I never want to experience psychosis ever again. And I thought that it had only been one night, by the way, and it was 5 days. Anyways, methadone's long half-life, 24 to 36 hours average, complicates this farther. At lower doses, the peak-to-trough ratio becomes more pronounced. The quote-unquote buffer of medication decreases, and patients may experience significant symptom fluctuation throughout the day. This is why split dosing becomes more relevant at lower doses, which is interesting. I might have to consult my doctor about that, the split dosing, see what they say about it. And then there's the post-acute withdrawal syndrome persists for months to years, which post-acute withdrawal symptoms stands PAWS. That's what that means. PAWS stands for post-acute withdrawal syndrome. So PAWS represents the brain's prolonged recalibration after chronic opioid exposure, and fatigue is among its most prominent and persistent symptoms. Approximately 90% of people recovering from opioid use disorder experience PAWS to some degree. The neurobiological mechanisms underlying PAWS-related fatigue include endorphin depletion, which is chronic exogenous opioids cause the brain to downregulate natural endorphin production. Recovery requires approximately 4 months of abstinence before endorphin reserves normalize. Then there's dopamine suppression, which reduced dopamine neuron firing rates persist for at least 24 hours into abstinence initially, with full dopaminergic recovery taking 12 to 18 months. And then there's norepinephrine dysregulation. Locus coeruleus hyperactivity during withdrawal depletes energy reserves through sustained stress response activation. And for someone like myself with 8 years of polysubstance use, PAWS symptoms are expected to persist 6 months to 2+ years after complete cessation. That means completely after I'm off the methadone, not just the illicit substances that I've abstained from using presently. Polysubstance history is consistently associated with worse treatment outcomes, including poor treatment retention and longer withdrawal periods. One study of 207 polysubstance-dependent individuals found neuropsychological abilities did not significantly improve over 1 year of abstinence, suggesting that recovery timelines in this population extend well beyond typical estimates, which is so unfortunate. So I've abstained from polysubstance use for 2.5 years, and the fatigueness has gotten worse. But that's because I'm tapering off the methadone. And I'm fine with that. It's just, oh man, it's a struggle, guys and gals. Like I said, my day starts at 4 a.m. I could not keep my eyes open from 4 a.m. to 12 p.m. today. I only started getting energy at midday, and right now, I'm quite frankly extremely fatigued. I'm very tired right now. And it sucks. Excuse me. The symptoms follow an episodic roller coaster pattern, fluctuating unpredictability with gradual improvement over time. Stress and environmental triggers can cause temporary worsening, which does indicate regression. Well, the stress is playing a huge part to making it worse for me, because that's all I do is stress. I stress over everything, and it's unfortunate. And it's something I'm attempting to grasp and get a hold of, because there's a fine line between, like I said in my previous episode, there's a fine line between a little stress that is good for you, essentially, and too much stress. And I'm a worrisome person. I have extreme anxiety all the time. I'm always worrying about things that haven't happened, that could happen, the what-ifs, all of this stuff that has no ground for me to even worry about, I'm worrying about on a daily basis. And I think that is playing a part into my fatigueness as well, because my brain is constantly on overdrive, worrying, thinking, ruminating, and it's just all playing a part into this huge cocktail of fatigueness. That's my belief, based on all of this research that I've done. But moving on to opioid-induced endocrinopathy demands immediate investigation. Chronic opioid use causes widespread endocrine disruption that is frequently overlooked clinically. Only 10% of cases are accurately diagnosed, while 68% are misdiagnosed as other conditions. The hormonal effects alone could explain severe fatigue. Testosterone suppression affects the majority of male long-term opioid users. Meta-analysis data shows a weighted prevalence of 63% hypogonadism in chronic male opioid users. In one methadone-specific study, testosterone levels in treated men averaged just 100 milligrams compared to averaged just 100 NGs compared to 415 NGs in controls. A fourfold difference. The mechanism is central or secondary hypogonadism. Opioids inhibit hypothalamic GnRH release, suppressing LH and FSH, which reduces testicular testosterone production. That's interesting. I guarantee you that has something to do with my extreme fatigueness. There's adrenal insufficiency and thyroid dysfunction as well. And the critical finding for prognosis here is these hormonal disruptions appear largely reversible. Testosterone can recover within days to weeks after opioid cessation, even in long-term users, and adrenal function typically recovers within 4 to 12 weeks, though some patients require longer. However, a 36 milligram methadone significant suppression likely persists. Testosterone suppression is dose dependent, with each 10 milligram increase in methadone dose associated with approximately 1 ng decrease in testosterone. Interesting. So moving on to sleep architecture. Sleep architecture remains disrupted but can substantially recover. Chronic substance use fundamentally disrupts sleep architecture, and recovery is measured in months. Opioids reduce deep sleep by approximately 67% and REM sleep by 25%, while increasing light sleep and wake after sleep onset time. Oh, wow. Chronic stimulant use similarly suppresses REM and non-REM stages, with approximately half of chronic amphetamine users showing sleep disruption persisting beyond 4 weeks of abstinence. And I'm one of those people. Can sleep debt from years of substance use be quote-unquote repaid? Well, research from Penn Medicine shows that chronic sleep loss causes permanent loss of neurons and the locus coeruleus, or coeruleus. I can't ever say that word right. Which is essential for alertness, suggesting complete neurobiological recovery may not be achievable. Wow, that sucks. However, significant functional improvement occurs with consistent sleep hygiene over months, and sleep architecture progressively normalizes over 6 to 18 months of abstinence, even if it never fully returns to pre-use baseline. That's very disheartening to hear that chronic sleep loss causes permanent loss of neurons. Folks, do y'all know how many days I have gone with no sleep? Not even just in addiction, in the military, in the Marine Corps. Days with little to no sleep. Especially in addiction to illicit substances, particularly amphetamines. I think there was one time I went 9 or 10 days with no sleep. That was the time that I went into psychosis. That was the result of no sleep with polysubstance use, psychosis. So I highly encourage you to not consume illicit substances, because it can lead to psychosis, and you do not want to experience that, folks. Trust me. But REM rebound, a compensatory surge in REM sleep after cessation from REM-suppressing substances, is pronounced and protracted following opioid withdrawal, observed for at least 10 weeks in clinical studies. This manifests as vivid, disturbing dreams and fragmented sleep that leave patients feeling unrested despite adequate sleep duration. Oh, wow, that that explains everything then to me. So I think I've already read that part, but still, me rereading that actually just made that very clear to me that that's exactly what I've been experiencing. Huh. That's very interesting. So, split dosing may reduce fatigue at lower taper doses. WHO guidelines, the World Health Organization, and I can't remember what this stands for. SAMHSA guidance acknowledge that approximately 30% of patients do not achieve effective, evenly sustained over 24 hours from once daily methadone. At 36 milligrams during a taper, the relative fluctuation in blood levels becomes more pronounced, potentially contributing to both morning over-sedation, peak effect, and evening interdose withdrawal. Split dosing, dividing the daily dose into 2 administrations, 10 to 12 hours apart, can smooth out these peaks and troughs. Evidence supports its use for patients experiencing oversedation during peak hours or breakthrough symptoms in evening hours. For this patient, myself, a potential split of 18 milligrams and 18 milligrams, or 20 milligrams in the mornings and 16 milligrams in the evening, may reduce fatigue from peak effect sedation while preventing end-of-dose withdrawal symptoms. I'm going to have to consult my doctor about this possible split dosing then, because I think that actually might help. So it says, though, that the evidence has limitations. Most research focuses on maintenance rather than taper, and compliance typically decreases with twice daily dosing. A brief trial, like a 2-week trial with reversion to single dosing, if ineffective, represents a reasonable approach. So I'm definitely going to have to consult my doctor about that. Critical blood work to request immediately if you're having these same issues. Research suggests that given the high probability of opioid-induced endocrinopathy and severity of symptoms, comprehensive blood work should be prioritized. So the highest priority, endocrine, morning cortisol, 8 a.m. fasting with concurrent ACTH levels below 3 UG, confirm adrenal insufficiency, 3 to 15 UG requires casintropin stimulation testing. Total testosterone, free testosterone, LH, FSH, SHBG, all fasting AM, expect secondary hypogonadism pattern, low testosterone with disproportionately normal or low LH or FSH. Prolactin, which elevated in 40% of chronic opioid user, further suppresses testosterone. And DHEA-S, low in central adrenal insufficiency. Standard workup, complete metabolic panel, CBC with differential, ferritin and iron studies, vitamin B12 and folate, vitamin D, and inflammatory markers. If hormonal deficiencies are confirmed, treatment options exist. According to this research, testosterone replacement therapy has documented benefits for energy, mood, and bone health within 12 weeks. Adrenal insufficiency may require hydrocortisone replacement through periodic reassessment during continued taper may show recovery. So some evidence-based interventions for managing taper fatigue. Exercise shows moderate evidence for reducing withdrawal symptoms, with moderate intensity activity appearing most effective. Starting light, walking, and progressing to 20 to 30 minutes of cardiovascular exercises 3 to 5 times weekly is recommended. Exercises releases endogenous opioids, stimulates BDNF, and supporting neuroplasticity, and directly boost dopamine, addressing multiple fatigue mechanisms simultaneously. And I can vouch for this because I usually go on a 2-mile walk on a daily basis. Given that we had an ice storm recently, I haven't done that in the past 4 or 5 days, actually. And maybe that's why I had such a hard time getting to an awake state today. Circadian rhythm regulation has strong theoretical support given the bidirectional link between circadian disruption and substance use disorders. Bright light therapy, 10,000 lux for 20 to 30 minutes in the morning, can shift sleep phase earlier and improve alertness. So every morning when I get up, I turn on, I have a light in my kitchen that is like supposed to replicate the sunlight, and so it's really bright, and I turn that on every morning when I get up, and I'll stay in that light for at least 90 minutes, because I've found some research that says that when you get up, you turn on bright lights in the morning for at least 90 minutes, it helps awaken you and get your body ready for the day, supposedly. But having the 10,000 lux for 20 to 30 minutes in the mornings can shift sleep phase earlier and improve alertness. Consistent wake time, even on weekends, is more important than consistent bedtime for circadian stability. Of course, there's medications that can help you sleep and stuff like that. Some supplements, though, with recovery safe profiles. I use this. I take magnesium glycinate. It has moderate evidence for sleep quality. I take vitamin D. I also take B complex vitamins and melatonin. I take all four of these things every day. And, my sleep has improved. I was having fragmented sleep of 2 hours at a time, but now I'm sleeping 5 to 6 hours solidly, but I'm still super fatigued, and it's so frustrating. But the most important message here is that based off of the research, this fatigue will improve. The brain retains remarkable neuroplasticity, and both structural and functional recovery are documented in neuroimaging studies of patients with similar histories. However, realistic timeline expectations are essential. So given the convergence of factors, 8 years of polysubstance history, extended stimulant-induced sleep deprivation, ongoing methadone taper, and likely endocrine disruption, significant improvement should be anticipated over 12 to 24 months rather than weeks. Dopamine transporter levels approach normal by 14 plus months of stimulant abstinence. Testosterone and cortisol can recover within weeks to months after opioid cessation. And sleep architecture progressively normalizes over 6 to 18 months. So basically, until I get off of the methadone completely, I'm going to be experiencing this. The current extreme fatigue represents the nadir, where ongoing taper withdrawal, accumulated neurobiological depletion, and likely undiagnosed endocrine suppression converge. With targeted intervention, hormone replacement, if indicated, split dosing trial, circadian regulation, and sustained abstinence from other substances, the trajectory is toward recovery, even if the path is longer than many patients anticipate. The conservative 1 milligram every 2 week taper rate is appropriate. Faster tapers correlate with worse outcomes. Pausing the taper at the current dose for several weeks while pursuing endocrine evaluation and initiating supportive interventions represents a reasonable clinical approach if symptoms are overwhelming. And so the conclusion here, folks, is that the extreme fatigue at 36 milligrams of methadone emerges from a perfect storm of interacting mechanisms. The adenylyl cyclase superactivation creates withdrawal symptoms despite continued medication. Opioid-induced endocrinopathy likely suppresses testosterone and possibly cortisol. And then my 8 years of polysubstance use depleted dopamine reserves, requiring over a year to restore, and disrupted sleep architecture continues its prolonged normalization. The most actionable finding is the high probability of treatable endocrine disruption, with 63% prevalence of hypogonadism and 15 to 24% prevalence of adrenal insufficiency in chronic opioid users. Comprehensive hormone testing should be considered mandatory rather than optional. Identifying and treating these deficiencies can provide meaningful relief while slower neurobiological recovery proceeds. Recovery timelines for this profile, my profile, are measured in months to years, but the evidence consistently supports the recovery occurs. Dopamine systems normalize at 12 to 18 months. Hormones recover weeks to months after opioid cessation. So this is after opioids are completely out of my system. Or significant dose reduction, which I have done. Sleep architecture substantially improves over 6 to 18 months. The patient as in me, is not experiencing a permanent state, but rather the predictable, if prolonged, process of neurobiological restoration after extended polysubstance exposure. So the moral of the story here is, folks, is that if you are a polysubstance user, I would highly encourage you to start working on not being a polysubstance user. Because if you ever have the intentions of getting off of these substances, it's going to come back to bite you in the long run. You might be feeling great and on top of the world right now, combining all of those substances, but let me tell you, when you come off of them, you're going to be wishing that you didn't consume all of those different substances. Especially if you're somebody like I was, where I was consuming them all every day. Like, I wanted to experience that initial high, that initial peaked high, constantly over and over and over and over and over again. And that's what led me to chronic polysubstance use. Thankfully, that's where the methadone came into play and has helped me abstain from polysubstance use. And I've only been using the methadone in the last 2.5 years. And I'm thankful for that. So it's just a matter of enduring and persevering, I think, in my case, with just persisting and doing what I'm doing and being patient with it and working on finding ways to improve the chronic fatigue that I'm experiencing. So my first step is going to be going and getting my testosterone levels checked. I need to get that done. And my second step is going to be consulting the doctor to split dose my dose. So that's going to be my first 2 steps I take personally to combating this fatigueness. And I'm going to see what the doctor says about all of this. And so hopefully from there, I can find some answers. Because this information here was rather insightful to me, at least, because this is based off of my personal profile. And, I hope that this gave some other people some insight. I used myself as an example just because, I don't know anybody else's case. And again, I'm not a professional at this. So I'm just doing research based off of my personal experiences. And this is what I've gathered. And it's been quite insightful. And again, I hope that, if any of you other people out there who may be in the same position I am in, or on a higher dose, this can just give you some insight as to what I'm going through and what I'm utilizing and going to utilize to attempt to combat the fatigueness. So, take it for what you will, folks. Again, I hope somebody finds value in this episode, as I hope they do in all of my episodes. And don't forget to smash that subscribe, like, and follow button. And I appreciate you listening. So, that's going to do it for now. Until next time, it's Robey with the Manufactured Mind. I hope you all have a wonderful day, folks. Peace out.